The old clock tower at the edge of town struck midnight, its chimes echoing through the empty streets. In the heart of the small town of Ashwood, the only signs of life were the dim lights of St. Agnes Hospital. The night shift had begun. Emily Foster had worked the night shift at St. Agnes Hospital for 2 years. She liked the quiet. The day shift was chaotic, with patients coming and going, doctors barking orders, and the constant hum of activity. But at night, everything slowed down. The halls were silent, the lights dimmed, and only a skeleton crew of nurses and staff remained. As Emily made her rounds, she felt a chill in the air. The old hospital was always cold, but tonight it seemed different. The air felt heavy, oppressive. She pulled her cardigan tighter around her and continued down the hall. "Hey, Emily," called out Sarah, her fellow nurse and closest friend on the night shift. "You okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." Emily forced a smile. "I'm fine, just a bit tired. It's been a long week." Sarah nodded. "Tell me about it. Only a few more hours to go. Let's grab a coffee." The two nurses walked to the break room, their footsteps echoing in the empty halls. They chatted about their weekend plans, trying to shake off the eerie feeling that had settled over the hospital. Around 2 a.m., Emily was checking on a patient in room 314, an elderly man named Mr. Thompson. He was recovering from a hip surgery and was fast asleep. As she adjusted his blanket, she heard a faint whisper. "Emily." She froze, her heart pounding. She looked around, but the room was empty except for Mr. Thompson. She shook her head, convincing herself it was just her imagination. She finished her checks and left the room, but the whisper echoed in her mind. As she walked back to the nurse's station, she saw something out of the corner of her eye. A shadow moved quickly across the hallway. She turned, but there was nothing there. Her heart raced as she quickened her pace. "Did you hear that?" she asked Sarah, who was filing some paperwork. Sarah looked up, puzzled. "Hear what?" "Someone whispered my name. And I think I saw a shadow in the hall." Sarah frowned. "It's probably just your imagination. This place can get pretty creepy at night." Emily nodded, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The rest of the night was uneventful, and Emily tried to convince herself that she was just being paranoid. But as the clock struck 4 a.m., she heard the whisper again. "Emily." This time, it was louder, more insistent. She followed the sound, her heart pounding in her chest. It led her to the basement, a place she rarely visited. The hospital's basement was dark and filled with old equipment and supplies. "Hello?" she called out, her voice trembling. "Is anyone there?" There was no response. She turned to leave, but the whisper came again, closer this time. "Emily." She spun around, her flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. For a moment, she thought she saw a figure standing at the end of the hall. She stepped closer, but the figure vanished. Emily's breath caught in her throat. She had to tell someone. She ran back to the nurse's station, her footsteps echoing in the empty halls. "Sarah." "I saw something in the basement," she exclaimed. Sarah looked concerned. "Are you sure? Maybe it was just a trick of the light." "No, it was real. I heard the whisper again, and I saw a figure." Sarah sighed. "Okay, let's go check it out together." The two nurses made their way to the basement, their flashlights casting eerie shadows on the walls. They searched every corner, but found nothing. "Maybe you're just tired," Sarah suggested. "We've had a long night." Emily nodded, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching them. The next day, Emily decided to do some research. She visited the town library and dug through old newspapers and records about St. Agnes Hospital. What she found sent chills down her spine. In the 1920s, the hospital had been an asylum for the mentally ill. There were reports of mistreatment, and several patients had died under mysterious circumstances. One patient in particular stood out, a young woman named Margaret, who had been committed for hearing voices. She had died in the basement under suspicious circumstances. Emily couldn't believe what she was reading. Could Margaret be the one whispering her name? That night, Emily returned to work with a sense of dread. She told Sarah about her findings, and Sarah's face went pale. "Do you think her spirit is still here?" Sarah asked, her voice shaking. "I don't know, but we need to be careful," Emily replied. As they made their rounds, the hospital seemed eerier than ever. The whispers continued, louder and more frequent. Emily felt a cold presence behind her, but when she turned, there was nothing. Around 3 a.m., they heard a loud crash from the basement. They rushed down to find a shelf of old equipment toppled over. Emily's flashlight flickered, and she felt a cold hand on her shoulder. "Emily!" She screamed and spun around, but no one was there. Sarah grabbed her arm, pulling her towards the stairs. "We need to get out of here," Sarah said, her voice trembling. As they reached the top of the stairs, the lights flickered and went out. The hospital was plunged into darkness. Emily's flashlight was their only source of light, and it cast long, eerie shadows on the walls. "We need to find the generator," Sarah said, trying to stay calm. "It's in the basement." Emily's heart sank. The thought of going back to the basement terrified her, but they had no choice. They made their way back down, the whispers growing louder with each step. In the basement, they found the generator room. As they worked to get the power back on, Emily felt the cold presence again. She turned and saw a figure standing in the corner, watching them. "Sarah, do you see that?" Emily whispered. Sarah turned and gasped. The figure stepped forward, revealing a young woman in a tattered hospital gown. Her eyes were hollow, and her face was twisted in pain. "Help me," the figure whispered. Emily felt a wave of sadness wash over her. "Margaret?" she asked softly. The figure nodded. "They hurt me. They locked me away. Please, help me find peace." Emily's heart broke for the young woman. "We'll help you," she promised. The next day, Emily and Sarah spoke with the hospital administrator, Mr. Collins. They told him about the encounters and the history of the hospital. Mr. Collins listened carefully. "I've heard stories about the old asylum, but I never believed them. If what you're saying is true, we need to do something." He agreed to let them perform a cleansing ritual in the basement to help Margaret find peace. That night, Emily and Sarah, along with a local priest, gathered in the basement. The air was thick with tension as they lit candles and began the ritual. The whispers grew louder, and the cold presence intensified. Emily could feel Margaret's pain and fear. Tears streamed down her face as she prayed for the young woman's soul. Suddenly, a gust of wind blew through the basement, extinguishing the candles. The room was plunged into darkness, and the whispers turned into anguished cries. "Emily! Sarah! Help me!" Margaret's voice echoed. Emily closed her eyes, focusing on the prayer. She felt a warmth spread through her, pushing back the darkness. "Go in peace, Margaret," she whispered. "You are free now." The cries faded, replaced by a sense of calm. The candles flickered back to life, and the cold presence was gone. The next day, the hospital felt different. The air was lighter, and the oppressive feeling was gone. Emily and Sarah knew that Margaret had found peace. Mr. Collins thanked them for their bravery. "You've done a great service to this hospital. Margaret's spirit can finally rest." Emily smiled, feeling a sense of closure. She knew that the night shift would never be the same, but she felt stronger for having faced the darkness. As the weeks went by, Emily and Sarah continued their work at St. Agnes Hospital. The whispers were gone, and the halls felt safe again. They knew that Margaret was watching over them, grateful for their help. Emily looked forward to her shifts now, knowing that she had made a difference. The night shift was still quiet, but it was no longer haunted by fear. Instead, it was filled with hope and a sense of peace. Years later, Emily would often think back to that night. She knew that the darkness could be overcome, and that even in the most haunted places, there was always a chance for redemption. And so the night shift at St. Agnes Hospital continued, no longer shrouded in haunted silence, but in the quiet hum of life, healing, and the promise of a new day.